The Bo and Luke Show. Inspiring you to be better, know better, and do better. Welcome to the Bo and Luke Show, with a diverse lineup of guests, from NFL players to CEOs. It's real and it's raw. From the Hale Media Group, here are your hosts, Robert Bo Bravo and Luke Carignan.
All right, Bo and Luke Nation, welcome to the Bo and Luke Show. We are a weekly podcast with Bo Bravo and myself, Luke Carignan. Purpose is to inspire fire to help people be, know, and do better. Bo, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, good morning, Bo and Luke Nation. This is Bo. Happy to be back for this episode with none other than, I would say he's probably famous, Bobby Moran. He's with Chief Revenue Officer with EverFi. He's a friend. He's a husband. We're going to have to get into this dog father thing here we have on our prep sheet. We have to talk about that, Bobby. You know, the main thing today, Bobby has advanced his career very quickly, and he's a C-suite executive. And, you know, we want to get into that with him and how we can help inspire others to do the same, talk about the journey, and see where it takes us.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for coming, Bobby. Let me toot your horn a minute here, Bobby, before we jump into things, but just a little bit of a background on Bobby. So I'd say, and you can get into this, but just from the outside looking in, I'd say Bobby really started taking off in like 2010, 2011. So Bobby worked on both presidential campaigns for Barrack Obama and Hillary Clinton, started off in sales at the advisory board company, then went to Politico, where the success is just incredible. Grew the company 30% year over year from 2014 to 2016, capping it off by generating Politico more than $100 million in annual recurring revenue before taking over the chief revenue officer at Politico in 2017, managing a group of over 175 people comprised of over new business, account management, daily operations. And then he was swooped up by EverFi, where he sits today. And Bobby, that's just insane career progression, which is why we thought that all our listeners would love to hear from you.
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. It's quite humbling.
Man, you earned it.
So before, we got to start out, the Bo and Luke Nation need to hear some stories, Bobby. So you worked on 2 campaigns. Let's talk, because I've seen it from a different viewpoint, being inside the White House for 10 years myself in 2 different administrations, Bush and Obama. So I've run into, not you specifically, but
you've run into the version of me, right?
Yeah, versions of you, any of that. And I'll tell you, they're different depending upon whether it's a Republican campaign or a Democrat campaign. Tell us what that was like. How did you get involved with that?
Yeah.
What was your role? I mean, lots of different roles in a campaign.
Yeah.
And did you have an area? Were you, boots on the ground type of individual?
Yeah. So this is actually it's a pretty interesting story. So I went to Georgetown, and Georgetown, smack dab middle of Washington, D.C., and everyone there is, like an aspiring or budding politician themselves, or likes to be involved or around politics. I kind of got swept up in that when I was on campus, and we have a lot of just great professors who are just passionate about the topic. So I took a lot of courses there. When I was 24, I was working for a startup in DC called Headfirst Sports. And I was coaching a lot of kids in baseball and basketball and soccer and other sports. And one of the kids I was coaching, his dad was the former director of advance in the Clinton White House. And He knew from conversations after practice that I really liked politics and wanted to work on a campaign. So my political career actually started in 2003. And I went to work for John Kerry in Iowa in 2003. So I worked on that campaign. You know the results of that. He obviously lost to George Bush in the general. Mm-hmm. But then come December 2006, I got a call from a friend of mine who was or had been working for then Senator Barrack Obama in his Senate office, and said that they had formed an exploratory committee and that he was going to announce his campaign for president in a couple of months. And I had been watching him since 2004 when he gave that electrifying speech at the Democratic convention, and got to. So I basically went to Springfield and I ran. I built the crowd for his announcement speech. We had 17,000 people outside. It was 4 degrees outside, but got to be a part of that. Unfortunately, I made a pretty bad decision though. So I worked on the Obama campaign. I was one of the first 10 people hired in the early part of 2007 to work on his campaign. And I worked on it from January of 2007 to May of 2007. And then I got a call from my friends who had worked on Hillary's campaign. Who I'd worked with in 2004 on the Kerry campaign, who were now working for Hillary. And they were like, "Hey man, look, we have a really cool role for you here. You're going to get access to the candidate. We'll pay you some more money. Come work for us." Mm-hmm. And I was a big fan of The West Wing as a kid. Growing up watching that show, I really wanted to work in The West Wing like you did. I wanted to be the next Josh Lyman. And so I thought, all right, look, she has all the money. She's going to win. I really like her. I respect her. My heart was with Obama. But I think she's really impressive, and she's going to get the nomination. I might as well move over there now versus waiting until the general. And so I made the decision to leave his campaign in the spring of 2007 to go to her campaign. Obviously, that next year played out, and Obama ended up with the nomination, got the nomination. So I went back to his campaign in the general. But I think I'm the only person in the country. This has not been verified by Wikipedia or anything, but I think I'm the only person in the country who started on the Obama campaign, left after a few months, went to work for Hillary, and then came back to the Obama campaign in the general. So if you have some questions, if you want to know, if you have some questions about what to do politically or some politics advice, you should ask for my advice, but just do the opposite. Just whatever I say, just do the opposite of what I say to do.
Yeah. So did you transition? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Luke.
Oh, no, you go, Bo.
It's all you. Transition. Were you still part of the President Obama's team after he got elected? Did you still do any volunteer?
Yeah, so I worked on the presidential inaugural committee, literally right up until the day of inauguration, and it was a great experience. But then, basically because I had left the campaign, this, that the White House jobs are so coveted, right? And basically because I had left the campaign, there was really no shot of me getting to work in the West Wing like I'd wanted to. So at that point, I just turned 30 years old and was like, all right, am I going to go work in the State Department or something like that? And I didn't really want to do that. So I decided to make a career change at that point. And basically in my 20s too, working in politics is exhilarating and it's fun and you learn a ton, but I didn't make a lot of money. And I was like, all right, if I want to, have a family one day and,
Sure.
all that sort of stuff, I need to be a little more responsible with my finances.
Hey, Bobby, can you tell the Bo and Luke Nation the story you told me about Rudy wanting to ride in the motorcade?
Yeah, sure. So just very quickly, Sean Astin, the guy who played Rudy back in the 90s. This is in 2004. He's one of the most positive, excitable people I've ever met. And so in 2004, I was with John Kerry. I think we were in Portland, and we were leaving one event to go to another, and he had been a surrogate speaker for us on stage, getting the crowd pumped up for John Kerry, he really wanted to ride in the motorcade, and so all the motorcade slots, Bo, you probably know this, they're all assigned, there aren't extra seats. And so he was like, I'll ride anywhere. Can I just ride anywhere in the motorcade? So we put him in the back of a Suburban, and he was crunched up, and he's a pretty small guy. So he was scrunched up in the back of the Suburban. I remember looking back at him in the way back, and with the lights going and the sirens. And I've never seen somebody so a grown man so excited to be in the back of scrunched up in the back of a motorcade, just so happy to be there.
Oh, it's just such an exhilarating feeling.
It is, yeah.
And what's cool, it's just the whole operation is pretty spectacular. And even if you go in a building and there's elevators, well, those elevators end up with a manifest, just like
that's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Exactly who's in what elevator, what car, what seat they're in, and so forth. It's pretty cool. And I think for me, and you probably appreciate this, I'm sure, being present when an administration changes and you see the new administration come in, And I
Yeah.
don't think this really had anything to do with the political affiliation of that administration,
Yeah.
but it was really cool to see and to watch the people. 'Cause I've been in the people business my entire adult life. You go from campaign, right? So everybody's in campaign mode, and it was
Yep.
Senator Obama,
Yep.
and you have this idea of who he is, and then all of a sudden he's the president of the United States. And I was fortunate to have an event with him just a few weeks in, after he was sworn into office,
Yeah.
and to see how the staff, not him, but how the staff around him, and even the volunteers. We were in Denver, so even the volunteers that come in from the local DNC chapter to help
Yeah.
with the event, they're almost still in like campaign mode,
That's right.
and
That's right.
their minds didn't really make that jump to, hey guys, this is the president of the United States. It's
You're now
not
governing.
Obama,
Yeah.
right? We're not campaigning. There's a whole different
That's right.
just operation here than what you've been used to over the past 2 years campaigning.
That's exactly right.
We had real quick. We had this evening huddle with the team, and it's the communications piece, and I was leading that, and we have the Secret Service, and then you have these folks with the staff.
Yeah.
And some of them are volunteers, and you got the president showing up in like 6 days, and you got to have this event. There's no rehearsal. It's just go time. Period.
Yeah.
And the staff wanted to go bowling. They're like, hey, let's go out and go bowling, right? And the rest of us sitting in the room who had been part of the previous administration, you know how these events go.
Yeah.
We kind of looked at each other and we're taken off guard and like, yeah, we're gonna have to train these guys, right? Because there's no time to go bowling.
Yeah.
This is the president. We're not campaigning. This is the real deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's awesome to talk to you and get your perspective on the campaign side.
It's just insane to me, guys. It's so cool that you've had the experience of being around those folks. Just to be able to carry that through your lives, because I think we all see them on TV, and they're larger than real life to everybody else in the country, but it's, a person that you dealt with on a day-to-day basis, which is just fascinating to me. I feel like we forget that they're just normal people like us.
That's exactly right. And they are.
Yeah, I think they absolutely are.
Well, Bobby, before we jump into like how you've gotten this amazing success and advanced your career, give us the snapshot of just how you've really risen to the top here. I mean, you started off in an industry, not only an industry, but a position, choosing the sales path in life is arguably like one of the toughest paths to choose. And I know that from experience.
It's funny, Luke, because we were, I was sort of prepping for today and thinking about, my career path. A couple of things came to mind. One is my career path really hasn't been very linear. In fact, there have been some really, really tough moments. And you're right. And the last 10 years has been great. It's been like a rocket ship. But the first, essentially my 20s, I had a set of just myriad experiences that, when compared to my peers at the time, I felt like they were all advancing much faster and much farther than I was. And so it hasn't been this just step-by-step career progression. But I would also argue that's actually worked out in my favor. So, it's actually, I don't think you know this. I was shortly after the Obama campaign was over, Bo, and he had been inaugurated, and I was 30 years old, and I didn't have a job at that point. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I felt like I had just a bunch of sort of eclectic experiences in my 20s, working for startups, working for nonprofits, working on campaigns, but no real sort of like tangible skill set to speak of. Had other friends who had gone to law school, gone to medical school. They had really specialized in something. And I remember I went back to Clyde's. It's this restaurant in DC, and I was basically going back to bartending, which I had done when I was in college at Georgetown. And I remember this one night I was driving home and just frankly just feeling really sort of like despondent about the future, because I was like, man, I'm 30 years old. I went to Georgetown. My parents sacrificed to get me to college, and here I am bartending. And there's nothing wrong with bartending, right? I made a lot of money. A lot of people do it. And you make a lot of money, 6 figures bartending. But I just felt to myself like I wasn't living up to my potential. And so the first job that I got that sort of got me on this path was going to the advisory board. So I guess my first piece of advice in this scenario is go to an organization where they can, whether it's sales skills or any skills, like where they will train the hell out of you. So I was only there for 2 years. I like to think I got my master's in sales when I was there. Like they like beat me down and then built me back up. And so for the first 6 months, it was just like training all day, every day before I was even allowed to talk to a prospect. But the training was so good, and they were really good at like taking talented young people and like molding them into like really good, successful sales professionals. And then they gave me more responsibility than I probably deserved. So I was on the road 4 or 5 days a week, flying all across the country, talking to hospital executives. I probably didn't really have much business being in the room with them, but I still had that experience. I kind of felt like paper mache in the meeting, like they're going to like poke a hole through me and realize I was hollow inside. But it was just a great experience. So that 2 years, like I got like my master's in sales because of the training. So my recommendation to anybody would be like join a company that you think can really teach you a valuable skill set that you can use in your next role, either at that organization or another company.
I think that is fantastic advice. And Luke, I'll tell you, and for all of the Bo and Luke Nation listeners, last episode with Jared Wilson, he brought in battle rhythm, so military term that he learned playing college football from Jim Harbaugh. And now I will say, Bobby, when you talk about being beat down and then built back up, that's boot camp. That's exactly what boot camp is all about. Tear you down so they can build you into what they need to build you into. So finding a company that can do that, I think that's great.
Yeah, it was great. It's funny. I still remember this one woman. She's so good. She would like literally hit you with a left cross and then like be there to catch you as you were falling. Her name was Margie Wayne, and Margie was giving me feedback one day, and it was so tough, but it was so accurate. But it was also so I remember going outside, and this is back in the day when you still had your not your iPhone, but the what was the original thing with that Steve Jobs? I can't remember this right now. The original thing. No, like with the wheel on it.
With the wheel on it.
Like the original thing you listen to music on. iPod. It's your iPod. I guess I was just like an iPod. Yeah, iPod. Yeah. Okay.
That was the weirdest way to describe an iPod.
I can only think of the visual. So I had one of those like old school iPods, and I had to literally leave the building because I was just like so despondent. And like play. You guys remember the song "Don't Worry, Be Happy" by Bobby McFerrin?
Yep.
So I had to literally like play "Don't Worry, Be Happy." Because I was like just getting beat up every day. But like I said, it was so good for me, and I learned so much.
That's awesome.
That is good. Hey, Bobby and Bo, so I have some, I did some research before this, and I have some points here. So I researched good career advice and bad career advice. And I'm just going to read you a line from whichever one I find here. And I'm not going to tell you whether it's good or bad. And we're just going to talk about it, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Does that sound good? So, Bobby, let's talk about developing conflict management skills.
Developing conflict management skills. I think that's actually incredibly important because, look, one of the things I found in my career is that the best ideas don't always win. The best idea does not always win in a meeting, doesn't always win in a presentation. And your ability to communicate something and get others to understand where you're coming from is just as important as the actual idea itself. And so when you are presenting an idea and someone disagrees with that, which by the way is a great thing, right? Like healthy conflict inside of an organization is actually really important to getting to best answer. But if somebody disagrees with you, learning how to navigate that can be the difference between your idea being adopted or not being adopted. And part of that actually starts with really making sure you understand the other person's point of view. I think one of the mistakes I made in my career, and sometimes still make, is that I'm so like passionate and excited and bought into my idea that I don't take the time to understand where the other person's coming from, and or just really understanding like oftentimes there's a lot of common ground or common area between what that person's thinking and what I'm thinking. conflict resolution, whether it's in the course of differing opinions, it's so important to be able to understand the person you're talking to, where they're coming from, and looking for the similarities between where you think and where they think first.
That's awesome. That's good. That's good advice. And then another thing that I think you're amazing at, that I can always improve at, is just being assertive and asking for what you want and knowing your own worth. And I know for a fact, being that that's something that you're so good at, that played a giant factor in the success that you've had over the past 10 years in really climbing. The people that are out there where that might be their weakness or their trouble point,
Yeah.
how can they, become more assertive in asking for what they want without coming off as, entitled, I guess I should say?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think the first step in describing, actually, is knowing what you want. The first step in being able to go to somebody else and saying, this is what I want, is actually knowing what you want. And most people don't even know that. And when I say, like, some people say, like, oh, I want to be successful, or I want that job, or I want to make a lot of money. Like, you need to know with specificity exactly what you want. So if you actually don't know what you want, and most people really don't, they've been taking the time and spent literally like the hours, like just thinking about, all right, what do I want in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now? Why is that important to me? What are my motivations behind getting that thing? If you don't understand yourself, if you don't understand exactly what you want, if you don't understand your motivations for getting there, then whether or not you communicate that effectively to somebody else doesn't matter. So that really is step one. Like, know with specificity what you want. And then I think once you know what you want, Luke, it is important to tell people, and it's important to tell them for a couple of reasons. One, because it's kind of a factor of, like, you hold yourself accountable when you tell somebody else out loud what you want. Two, I think we oftentimes assume, like, that people that we're coming across as like too sort of like boastful, or coming across as too entitled. When in reality, when people know what you want, and let's say you came to me and said, Bobby, I really want this kind of opportunity, or I really want to get to this point in my career. Now, when little things pop up, when a project pops up across the organization, and you've told me that, that moment's gonna happen. I'm gonna say, let me connect Luke to that project, because I know that's what he's looking for. Whereas if you never told me, I may not have thought to connect you to that project. I think about this guy, Chris Conway, who came to me. This is back in like 2012, 2013 at Politico. And I don't remember exactly what I was saying to that group, but it was during Chris's onboarding. And I was basically saying to them, like, you need to be the kind of person who basically gets after it. And so the next day, Chris put time on my calendar, and he came to my office, and he said, I just want to let you know, like, I want to be that guy. I want to be the person that you were describing yesterday. And to be frank, I don't even recall the person exactly what I said, but I knew that he was ambitious. I knew that he wanted to take on more. And he did. And he ascended in his career faster than others because he was vocal about the fact that he wanted to try and do more.
It's a really great point. So it's almost like, if Chris Conway, if there are two separate universes with two separate Chris Conways, imagine that. But so if there's one where he did the same amount of work, but didn't come in and tell you that he wanted to get after it, you're saying the Chris Conway that comes in and tells you they want to get after it gets the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, and like let me be very clear about something. The most important thing, everyone's like, comes to me and says, I want to move from associate director to director, or director to senior director. I want to grow and advance my career quickly. The most important thing, aside from knowing what you want, is you have to be good at your existing job. Just expecting to like advance and grow in your career is not enough. Like, I'd say 80 to 85% of this is be good at your job and work really hard. So that is like the foundations. That's the prerequisite. And so Chris was someone who worked really hard and was good enough at his day job. But he then created some space for himself by being good enough at his day job. And so then when opportunities popped up, because I knew he was ambitious, and he told me, I really want to take on more. When those opportunities popped up, I gave him more projects and things to work on. So yeah, I think in the two separate worlds where you have one Chris Conway who doesn't tell me anything and is good at his job versus the person who is good at his job and tells me he wants more. Like that person's going to get more opportunities.
That's really powerful. That's super powerful. Bo, have you seen that work in your travels as well?
Yeah, I certainly have. And it's super, super, super great advice. And I think when you are, when you have the people who know what they want and they can voice it, that's fantastic. And then if you have the leadership skills that Bobby's presenting to us here to identify that and care about what somebody else wants and help them advance through their career, that's fantastic. What I find interesting as well, there's a Harvard Business Review study talking about that looked at the types of individuals that make it to the C-suite, right? And this is just C-suite in general for this particular study, and it came out that like 97% of them are probably extroverts. They're not your introverts. They're people who can be voiceful, that can tell others what they want, and they've done that throughout their career. And then they get to the top. But what I like what Bobby said about you got to be really good at your job. The one thing about this study that they looked at was, okay, 97% are extroverts, they make it to the top, but they created this bubble and literally less than 10% were actually competent at their job as in the right?
Wow.
So there was overconfidence, undercompetence. So if you take, for everybody listening, if you take Bobby's advice, every step of the way, whether you're an introvert or extrovert doesn't really matter, but be good at what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Make the effort to be, I don't care if you're at the front desk and you're greeting patients in a physician's office when they come in, or, you're in the mailroom, it doesn't matter. Or you're a manager and now you've got a few employees. Do your best to be really good at that. And, that will really take you a long ways.
Because that's the first question I ask anybody when someone comes to me and says, I want to promote this person, right? Or what about this person for that role? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is look at like their metrics. I'm going to look at, how are they performing in their current role, right? Then we look at everything else, right? Potential and attitude,
Right.
approach, everything else. But the other thing I'll say that sort of that backs that up too, Bo, is like I wasn't the best salesperson. I wasn't actually, I've never actually been the best at the thing that I was doing. I was in the top tier. Like I worked really, really hard, but I was never like the absolute best. But I think because I worked hard, was top tier, but then also was vocal about, these are the things I want and this is where I want to get to. Then when those opportunities presented themselves, others were more likely to come to me and say, hey, do you want to work on this thing?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Absolutely great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, I have another topic here to talk about. And this is one where I find myself reverting back to this all the time. And it's probably one of the worst habits out there. And both is for you and Bobby. A lot of people, when they start off as hourly workers, we kind of develop a mentality that time worked equals value created. How do you maintain your professional career, just maintaining focus on results rather than time spent at work? Because I think that's a giant trap people get into where they say, well, I spent all this time working, but they didn't really get results. And now with their manager, there's obviously a big disconnect there. And I feel like it's something you have to maintain and keep improving on throughout your life. How do you maintain that focus? Because clearly, you're focused on results, and that's why you're at where you're at.
Yeah, it reminds me of this like kind of mentality that you're starting to see slowly, although it still exists, but you're seeing it sort of start to slowly slip away in corporate culture, where the person who's in the office like 14 hours a day, right, is like the best employee. And from my perspective, like it's the employee who just gets their job done, right? So like I'm happy if you work 7, 8, 9 hours a day versus 14, and you're getting your job done with better results. So it's kind of it's the whole work smarter, not harder thing, right? There's still a certain amount of hard work that you need to put in. If you're only working 3 hours a day and getting your job done, you're probably missing an opportunity to like really go above and beyond and advance further and faster in your career. But the ability to look for efficiencies, the ability to look for, all right, how can I do what I'm doing, but do it more effectively in less time? I mean, that's the name of the game. Like that's literally what businesses are trying to do. So if you can apply that to your own self and think about what are the things I'm doing today that are scalable, and then the best part of that, Luke, is if you have that mentality and that approach, and that's something you can apply to yourself. Well, anybody else doing your job can do that as well. And so one of the things I really appreciated about people I've worked with is when they see a problem inside their organization and they're like, this thing takes me 3 hours every day. I'd like to be able to spend 1 hour on it instead. And they figure out the solution to that. Then they go to their colleagues and peers and they say, hey, like I figured out a solution to this. And now we just saved the collective company 40 hours a week by one person figuring out like one efficiency that they can drive in their role.
And then it kind of builds on as well. And I wanted to touch on this with you because one thing that I think you've done really well is seek out other mentors throughout your career. And I was thinking last week, so I was kind of like trying to play an analogy between business and professional careers, between professional sports, right? So we aspire to be the best at something out there. Yes. And, like making it to the NBA is just like us making it in our business career.
Yes.
But there's a huge difference. And here it is that people in the NBA practice every single day. They practice 100 times more than they ever play in the game. You get to the professional world, it's the complete opposite. Our practice is when it actually matters with business, when we're in front of clients. And it's just kind of mind-blowing to me, the amount of people that use game time as their time to practice. But when it comes to you, and, I've even been with you on the weekends and you'll say, hey guys, I need, give me a couple hours. I have a meeting with my mentor. And, you're a C-level and you still seek out those mentorships. Is that something that you've always done? And I guess, what do you do to practice in the background?
Yeah, you brought up two key points there. I think the first one is just, is the preparation prior to whether it's a sales call or a meeting internally, just making sure you're going into that meeting prepared. Not only are you going to be better, not only are you going to feel better walking into that meeting, but you'll probably be better. And the person from whom you're sitting across or talking to over the phone is going to sense that level of preparation, right?
Sure.
So that's just that's the first thing. The second thing, and you brought up around having coaches and mentors. I mean, this part has been absolutely critical to and just a key part of my success across the last literally 15, 20 years. And there have been maybe a handful of people that I can look at and say that person, not only back then, but actually continues to have an impact on the trajectory of my career. So a couple of thoughts there. One, and you also brought up professional sports. Like, get a coach. Everybody needs coaches. Michael Jordan, greatest basketball player of all time.
Yep.
Up for debate, but in my opinion, he is. Had a coach, Phil Jackson, right? So like seek out especially if you can afford it. Like, now that I'm a little bit older and I have a little more money, I have an executive coach. I have somebody I talk to 2, 3, 4 times a week. And the value of that is that not only has he been there and like done it before, but he's also able to hold up a mirror when like I'm unhappy or frustrated about something happening internally at the company. He's like, well, actually, that's your fault, right? And he can smack me around a little bit and help get me to see that what role I'm playing in that problem. So having a coach can really sort of clarify your way of thinking. I think the second thing you said, I mentioned about mentors. Sorry, go ahead, Bo.
No, I thought you were done. You finished because I have things to say too because you're awesome.
I'm on this like long soliloquy here. I think that the second thing about like mentors, like they're absolutely critical. And I think people have this like fallacy in their minds where like, I need to like go ask somebody to be my mentor. Like, you don't like, it's kind of like dating. Like, you just see somebody in your company, or even better yet, outside of your company, who you're like, I see that person, they have admirable qualities. I want to be like them in 5 years or 10 years. And just like go ask them to say, hey, can we get coffee sometime? And then ask them about their life, ask them about their career trajectory. Obviously, I like talking about mine. People like talking about themselves, right? And take an interest in what they've done, take an interest in the path that they've had. Recognize that it's unique to them, but there's something that you can profit from that. You can learn from that. And then across time, that mentorship, that relationship will grow. And rather than just asking for somebody to be your mentor, it'll just develop and happen naturally. And we're meeting with that person once a month, once a quarter, and they're giving you some good advice. And then you have to actually apply that advice, right? Like there's this great quote, like to profit from good advice requires more wisdom than to give it. So that's mentors are just a critical part of the game.
Fantastic.
What were you going to say there, Bo? Curious.
Bobby mentioned about being prepared, right? So a level of preparation. So I think in our next episode, we're going to talk about the book I have coming out this Friday. But one of my things is when we talk about people's behaviors, whether it's in the workplace, at home, I go into a whole line of how to demonstrate core values, how to actually do. I'm a big person on implementing and actually doing. A lot of people can talk, but when it comes right down to it, you have to be able to execute and do. So one of the things I actually put forth is tools and tips on how do you demonstrate respect? You can say, I respect Bobby, I respect Luke, I respect my boss. Okay, you're speaking it, but how do you actually do that? What are things you can do to show respect? So if I'm leading a meeting, or whether I'm leading the meeting or I'm invited to the meeting, one of the things I can do to either respect the people I brought in because it's their time that they're giving to me to attend this meeting, I need to be prepared. I need to be prepared to deliver that meeting, to set forth the agenda, to set forth, what are the results we're looking to get from this meeting. And if I'm attending the meeting, then, I'm coming to the meeting prepared to discuss whatever that agenda or those topic items are. If I haven't done that, then I feel like I'm just not showing respect to my team or the others that are in the meeting.
That's right.
I'm not valuable. I'm not respecting their time. I'm not respecting my own time. So I think that is preparation is critical. And it doesn't matter if it's a meeting or you're prepping for a call with your mentor, or, we're getting ready to do a podcast. We prep, right?
Yep.
That's how you get the results hopefully you get the results that you're looking for. And I would only add on the mentorship side, I have mentors. I've had them for a long time. And I think one of the valuable things to do is, don't always think of a mentor as someone older than you. There are a lot of brilliant young minds. And I love seeing a younger person's face just light up when you're asking them for, their thoughts or feedback or how you might handle a situation, because you've really seen some real drive or ambition in somebody, and then they're really getting things done. There's no reason why you can't look for mentorship and guidance from somebody. Doesn't matter if they have as many years of experience as you, or they're as old as you, or they have the education that you have. When you really can light a fire in people when you're asking them for feedback, and they would never expect they'd never expect you to do that.
So true. It's so true.
Bo, can you tell us a little bit, getting on the preparation and the practice and things like that? And I don't know exactly how things are. I'm hoping that you're going to tell us. But in the White House, I'm imagining that it's like 99% preparation and then 1% execution.
Yeah, I think that is really close, Luke. One of the big things for prepping, if you're going to have an event with the president, we had amazing. And we kept them up to date. They were living documents. We had checklists. We had standard operating procedures, right? So if I get notified that I'm going to lead the team, we're going to go to Chicago because the president's going to have an event, right? Chances are, over time, somebody has been to that city before and had an event. So we have this great big database. You start researching the history of previous forth, and you just start developing this basically a guidebook, playbook of how this event is going to go. So yeah, there's a ton of preparation, because you don't get, in those environments, you don't get a rehearsal, right? When the president takes the stage, whether he's on a stage or he's just talking to a group in a room or doing a photo op, when the president arrives, you're not saying, okay, Mr. President, we're going to run through this a couple times. Right? There's just way too much on the agenda that's not happening. So when the president takes the stage, it's live, it's go time. There's no rehearsal. So you're right. It's all about prep.
That's awesome.
It's just to jump into that real fast, Luke. One of the things that people don't understand about being a candidate is that, like, your life is really hard, because it's like every day there's like a 15-page schedule like down to like when and where you're going to go to the bathroom. So it's actually not that great of a life.
Really?
Oh yeah, like the daily schedule for a candidate or a president is like it's literally like 15 pages long, and every minute of the day is like specced out where you're going to be, who you're going to be with, what you're going to be talking about. And unless you have scheduled downtime, it's insane how much it's specced out. And so to Bo's point, like you have people who are literally on the ground, a week, 2 weeks ahead of time, spending an entire week planning out the 5 hours that you're going to be there. So you can imagine like it's the preparation is key to the success of that event that Bo's describing.
Sure.
Yeah.
So why is it? Why do you think both of your leaders? Why do you think people don't do this in their professional careers? What is it that? Why can't we replicate that success when it's just so obviously in front of us?
Wow, that's a great question.
Yeah, Bo, I'm gonna kick that one to you, man. I don't know the answer to that.
I think a lot of that, Luke, has to do with, it's something I've been writing some other stuff about. I really think it comes down to just poor leadership overall. I was just doing some research recently. The leadership development industry in the United States, it's about $160 billion a year industry.
Wow.
Most companies will outsource their leadership development training to some other vendor that comes in and teaches courses, or their online courses, or whatever the case might be. People will learn. They think they're going to take those things back to their company and implement them, but it just fails because they go back to their companies and they go right back into the same routine that they had before they took the course. So I think we have a real problem in this country of developing really good leadership skills in folks. And without it, it's hard to really, just at the crux of what leadership is, to be able to motivate and influence your teams to perform and to do what we need them to do. It becomes very, very difficult when people haven't had the proper training or experience, or even the real ability to get things done like that. That's a tough question. You could probably talk for days just on that alone.
I think we could. And then, I'm going to transition here so when I Googled bad career advice, the businesspundit.com actually popped up first, number one. And so this is just, if anybody Googles the worst business advice, I guess this is the first nugget of information that pops up. And I think it's kind of controversial, and I wanted to throw it out there for discussion for both of you. So it says the worst advice you can give somebody about their career is that if you follow your passion, the money will find you. Is that bad advice? I mean,
no, I'm sorry. Yes, it is. I disagree with that on some level, meaning like if you're not passionate about what you're doing on a daily basis, if you're not excited, if you don't have some level of emotion that is driving you, like all of the money in the world is not going to get you out of bed every day. Although maybe that's wrong. Maybe all the money would get you out of bed, but like a certain amount of money is not going to get you out of bed. Like the difference between 50K and 100K or 100K and 200K. Like you've got to be passionate about what you're doing. And there's no way you can lead a team. There's no way you can manage a company. There's no way you can start a company without being passionate about the job you're doing, whether your job is manager or maybe whether your job's in product or technology or marketing. Like if you're not passionate about that work, if you don't have a love for what you're doing, then no one's going to want to follow you. No one's going to want to work with you. So I actually, I'd also disagree with that, because when I look back this actually goes back to the Obama thing. So bring it back to us for 1 second. And by the way, I have tons and tons of respect for Hillary Clinton that I never would have had I not worked on her campaign. And I would have gladly seen her, go to the White House and work for her there. That being said, in 2007, my heart was with Obama. Like I wanted him to win. I really liked him. But I made a sort of a calculated political decision, which was I'm going to go to her campaign now because I think she's going to win. So my heart was with him. My head was with her. And obviously, like following my head in that scenario didn't work out. So it's not always about like following your head or like, just making the prudent sort of, calculated decision. Like following your heart can work. But you have to blend that with a healthy amount of reality and discipline and understanding for what you're about to do.
Yeah. And go ahead, Bo.
No, I would add that I think that statement is good and bad. You know, passion leads. I don't think you can necessarily assume passion leads to money. Um,
Yep.
Not everybody, not you can have passion about, being maybe you're passionate about being a missionary, and that's what you do for your entire life. And you probably have if I would say it this way, if you can take your passion and turn that into work, and that's how you spend your days in your life, that's a fantastic, rewarding experience, because you're doing what you are passionate about.
Yeah.
Some things lead to good pay, some things don't.
It's true.
So yeah, so I would disagree with the statement as it
Yeah.
is.
And pay isn't
Yeah.
always the definition of success, right? Like success at a certain point is
No.
it's not always about the amount of money you're making. So one thing I'd recommend to anybody who is actually thinking about that statement, Luke, is Google the 2005 Steve Jobs Stanford commencement speech. If you just like Google that, it's like
Oh, that's a good
it's 15
speech.
minutes long. 15
That's a
minutes
good
long.
speech.
It's so good, and he talks about following your passions, but obviously like the idea that while you're doing something you may not be able to look back, so you don't have the ability to look back while you're doing it and connect the dots, but 2 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later, you can look back and see how those things you did led you to where you are. And when I think about my own career, that very same thing happened to me. Like I mentioned, when I was 30, like it was really, really hard. I felt super, super behind. I don't know if you guys have ever felt this way at certain points in your career, but like whether you were in high school or college or mid 20s, mid 30s, like I have felt behind in comparison to my peer set on multiple occasions. And it's really hard when you're in those scenarios. But I would argue that my 20s also is what enabled me to, I think, ascend as rapidly as I have in my 30s. Meaning, when I look back, I worked in my 20s. I worked for a nonprofit. I worked for a startup. I worked on campaigns. And each one of those experiences taught me something very specific. Like working for a campaign, like it taught me how to like just make things happen fast. Like a day in the life in a campaign is like is like 30 days in real life. Like you're moving 1,000 miles an hour even when you go bowling in the evening. Working for a startup, like you learn that you just got to like whatever you have to do in order to get something done. There's no swim lane. Like everyone's doing everything to make something happen, right? Working for this nonprofit I worked for, I learned how to do public speaking. And so when I got to be 30, and then I got to my first management role, what was amazing about that was that I was actually drawing on experiences in my 20s where I didn't know at the time that they would help me when I was 32 or 33 when I was first managing a team. But the public speaking helped me with being in front of my team for the first time and commanding their respect and confidence. The making things happen fast was critical for working at an organization like Politico that was growing so quickly. So like, I think there is something to be said for try a bunch of different things. And even though you may not feel like you are in comparison to your peers who are following just one path and taking that sort of like linear path, eventually, if you're able to take those two or three things and combine them, you actually can ascend even faster in your career eventually later on.
Sure. What would you say, what advice would you give to people that, aren't necessarily starting off earlier in their career? Let's say they're mid or late 20s, but what about like the 40-year-old person that's, moderately successful,
Yeah.
but it's kind of stalled out, right?
Yeah.
What advice would you give to them to be able to reinvent themselves professionally? Because I mean, let's be real, you're 40 years old, you still have, 20 to 30 years left of gas left in the tank in order to make these decisions. That's
Absolutely.
a ton of time.
Well, I think first of all, recognizing that careers are, we're no longer I think everybody knows this, but we're no longer in the day where you go to work for one company at 20, you're there for 40 years, right? Like, and that's not only true about just working at one company, but you actually might change industries. You might change, literally the entire job you have might change. So we have to be able to reinvent ourselves. I'd say that for somebody who's like at an organization, I'm just picking an example here. Somebody who's at an organization doesn't want to change their career necessarily, or even change organizations. It feels like they stalled out. You got to understand why you're stalling out. So I think the first thing really is like ask for a 360, right? Ask for somebody to like give you some real candid feedback about if you feel like you've stalled or you have stalled, like why have you stalled? Do you know why you've stalled? What actually is holding you back in diagnosing that? And again, like I think executive coaches can help with that. I think, just go to HR and be like, hey, I really want help. And by the way, that first step unto itself is like, that people will really respect that. Like they'll be like, wow, this person is humble enough and, open enough to feedback, to recognize, and they're also clearly ambitious, right? Because they want to get to the next level. But they're open enough and humble enough to recognize they're not doing things perfectly. None of us are. And they want to get to the next level. So I think the first step is just understanding, why are you stalling if you have stalled?
I love that. I love that. And Bobby, I'm going to switch it up a little bit here for the last few minutes, but
Sure.
Bo, and Bobby, I don't even think I mentioned that I'm going to talk this. It just kind of came to my mind, but I want to transition a little bit more to, I guess, the personal side of things. But one thing that Bobby has always been amazing at, that I really admire him for, is how at such a young age he had made good decisions for financial planning,
Yeah.
and also made sacrifices to do so. So when I think of sacrifices, and Bobby's probably going to hate me for mentioning this, but for the longest time, he drove this, and he still has it. He has this old black Honda Accord, like where the roof is rusting. I mean, he was pulling in to the Politico parking deck as a sea level with this rusted roof, Honda Accord that, I'm sure he doesn't have any car payments for. I don't even know if Bobby knows what year it is, actually. Like, it could be an 02, it could be an 03. No one really knows. But during this time, what's interesting is Bobby now owns multiple properties around the country, right? You have places in different states.
Yeah.
You own apartment buildings that you rent out in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And it's put you, Bobby, in like a very envious financial position personally. Can you just talk about that personal aspect of things and the sacrifices, and like, how have you done this? Because it blows my mind.
Yeah. So, and again, I think oftentimes you see a lot of stories like this, whether it's me or anybody else. And by the way, thank you, Luke. I don't know that I'm that successful, but I appreciate it. Yeah, a lot of these things are born out of tragedy. And so when I was, I guess I was like, I was in my late 20s. My uncle basically ran a mini Ponzi scheme in Richmond. He was like the Bernie Madoff of the Richmond area.
Really?
And yeah, my parents had invested like their entire life savings with my uncle, because he was like giving us like great returns, like 20, 30, 40% returns year over year, from like, 2004 or 5 to 2007. And then unfortunately, a majority of his money was invested in real estate, and the real estate, came crashing down. And we realized that it was just a massive Ponzi scheme in terms of like from a real estate perspective. And so, my parents lost their life savings. They had to sell their house. It was pretty devastating. I only lost $30,000 at the time. I had $30,000 invested. That was all the money I had saved at that point.
How old were you?
I was 29 years old.
It's like $1 bajillion to a 20.
Yeah. That's right. And so that was just I was actually less worried about the fact that I just lost 30 grand. My parents had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I just developed I was like, I'm not going to let this happen again to me or my parents. I need to get back to a place where we're in a position of financial strength. I need to understand how to get myself back to the place where I want to be. And so I just started reading a bunch of books. And the first book I read that everybody talks about, that's like it's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It won't surprise anybody, but it's such a great book. But that book is less about like tactical and practical advice for how to, make a lot of money. It's more about a mindset, and mindset to me is the most important thing. And so just basically the point of that book is like understanding cash flow. It's understanding how the wealthy think. It's understanding, what you need to do in order to have money work for you. And so to your point about the car, like I would love nothing more than to, go out and buy a super expensive car. And believe me, I've flirted with it. I have the money to do it. I still think about it. But, we think about like purchasing an asset is something that puts money in your pocket. And cars are not an asset. They take money out of your pocket on a monthly basis. Whether you own them outright or not, you're still paying for insurance, still paying for gas, still paying for repairs. And so I've really made an effort to buy assets real estate being one of them across the last decade, to use my extra income to do that versus buying liabilities, which a car is.
That's great advice. That's fantastic advice. So, and by the way, Bobby does have a newer Honda Accord now. It's super nice.
Yeah. Well, we still have the 04 actually. The 04, we still have it.
You still have it is an 04.
It is an 04. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then by the way, since then I've read just dozens and dozens of books on personal finance, but I'm a big believer that all of us just need to we really need to understand our finances far beyond where we are today, because the same thing could happen to anybody. It happened to my parents, happened to me. Really understanding how money works is critical. It's not taught in schools effectively, and yeah.
And so you started doing this, like, in the grand scheme of things, not even that long ago, right? We're talking, what, 12 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, that's right. 12, 13 years ago is when I first started really sort of like reading a lot. And then I didn't buy my first house until 2011, 2012. And then we've bought a new place, once every couple of years. So we now have seven places, both in DC and in Ohio.
Oh, where in Ohio?
Cincinnati area.
Ah, gotcha.
Yeah, my dad's from Loveland, Ohio.
Yeah, Bo's got a place in Ohio. Are you in Ohio right now, Bo?
I am. I'm at our house in Ohio, and I just love your advice, Bobby. It's so practical, and it can apply to everybody, which is great. Yeah, so we're in Ohio. My wife has a company here in real estate, Red Door Home Sales, and we actually next Friday going to look at our first building, commercial building to look at.
Oh wow,
yeah, that's awesome.
Even I'm sitting here listening very attentively, saying, "What is he going to?" That's fantastic. I didn't write that down. It's all about mindset. My oldest daughter's 26. She's a captain in the Army, stationed in Germany. She just bought her first investment property. She bought a house in Germany for a rental. That's rented out, and she did the same thing. I think it was all about her mindset. That's very well put. And she's just had that, and it's being smart with her money. I remember one day, because I had access sometimes, because she's overseas, to her bank accounts, just to help make sure her bills are getting paid and so forth. And I opened the bank, going online, and I look at the account, and like half of her money was gone. So I get on and I'm messaging her on my phone, and I'm Ellen, what happened? Where's all your money? Because it's just not like her to all of a sudden spend, a ton of money.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, I moved it to this different investment because it wasn't making enough for me sitting there in the bank. Yeah. Right. So we kind of had that same mindset, like what money I have needs to work for me.
That's right.
It needs to be an asset. It needs to be working for me, not against me.
Every dollar that comes into your bank account, you have a choice from how you want to use it. Right. And do you want to have those dollars make more dollars for you, or do you want to spend them on things? Now, by the way, I'm not advocating living like a life where you don't do anything and you don't have experiences and you don't go out, right? Like we still need to and have some money set aside for that. But just and Luke and we've had plenty of times together doing stuff just like that. But I think we definitely need to get an understanding of, to your point about understanding investments, right? Like what kind of investments over the long haul will give me the best return for my dollar? Do I want to invest in index funds? Do I want to invest in stocks or bonds, large cap, small cap, international, domestic? Do I want to invest in REITs? Do I want to invest? So there's just all these things to understand that I would argue are basics that most people just sort of throw their hands up and say, I don't need to know that stuff.
Oh, they don't teach it to us in school at all.
Yeah.
Like, as you're coming up through grade school, high school, kids don't even know how to fill out a tax form.
Well, this is actually where I will use one opportunity, if I can, for 1 second, just to brag on.
You can have the rest of the time yourself.
to brag on the company I work for, EverFi. Like that's what EverFi was founded to do. It was born out of the financial crisis, and the idea was that we don't teach financial literacy to kids. And we're not teaching this stuff in the schools. We're not teaching it to adults. And so we have a SaaS-based technology product that we work with literally K through 12 and in higher ed space to teach young adults, young people about financial literacy, because we don't do a good enough job of teaching it in schools. It's not one of the courses you're required to take. So that's literally that was the original mission of EverFi.
That is absolutely amazing. I guess something you can get passionate about as well.
Exactly.
So is that still at the core of what EverFi does, and is your target market those schools?
Yeah, it is definitely the core of what we do. But it's actually it's expanded from just things like financial literacy to other just socially important topics, everything from prescription drug safety to alcohol abuse prevention on college campuses, or sexual abuse prevention. To Jeff Weiner is on the is the CEO of LinkedIn, is on our board, and he's really passionate about compassion. And teaching leaders how to be compassionate, and that we can be more compassionate, we all be way more effective leaders. So we've created a scalable course that you can literally deploy to every kid in the country and teach them how to be more compassionate. You can solve a lot of problems through technology. You can also create a lot of problems, but in this case, we're trying to solve problems by deploying these courses in schools across the country. We have 25,000 schools we work with right now to help these kids learn some of these, critical life skills, critical life topics to be talking about.
Wow, you're doing a noble thing. This is gonna, it's gonna help kids. It's not like just learning a course. This is gonna give them skills that'll set them up for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
I mean, this could really impact them and their families as they grow.
Yeah, I've always thought that if you can run and it sounds like this is exactly, people that might take the course or go through this and learn from EverFi. If you can get to the point and at an early age, as early as possible, where you're running your home like we would run a business, and have that mindset. I mean, we would just make some amazing leaps and bounds in this country.
Just the value of compound interest across time. Like if I started saving when I was 20 versus 30, I could retire 15 years earlier. Like it's insane. The difference between starting to save when you're 20 and invest when you're 20 versus investing when you're 30, or even waiting till you're 40, then you're really behind the eight ball. So just simple things like that, getting people to do this when they're younger, to your point, Bo, is just, it's so critical. Hey, Luke, can I, if you don't mind, there were two things that I was thinking about, like when we were, prepping for today, speaking of preparation, that I wanted to make sure that I just, I threw out there in terms of really good, advice that I've been given in my career that I think that's really helped me.
Yes.
And the first one is just, someone said to me a long time ago, get outside of your bubble. It's especially, I think sometimes we tend to, and this is actually so true when you look at now what technology is, the bad side of technology. We're now in these insulated bubbles in terms of our news feeds and Facebook and everything else. And we get, bogged down to a certain way of thinking. But the point was that when this person gave me the advice, she said, get outside, meaning get outside and meet people outside of Politico. This is when I was earlier in my career at Politico. She said, you need to get outside the organization. And I happened to also read an article that came out in 2015. This guy, Michael Simmons, wrote an article on Business Insider, and it said the number one predictor of career success, according to networking science, that's the title of the article. It talks about how everybody always thinks about Steve Jobs as this enigmatic guy with a couple of just character traits that made him, who he is, and definitely had an ability to, bend people to his reality, as they say. But more importantly, the point was that he had open networks, that he tried a bunch of different things. He tried a bunch of random things. And then he had people from various networks that helped him grow in his career too. And so I think one of the things I found was that just getting outside of media while I was in media helped me get to my next role at EverFi. That getting outside of your bubble and meeting people from other industries and talking to them can really help you when you come back to your own industry and look at it differently. Because oftentimes the solution to a problem is just simply looking at it in a different way and having a different perspective. But it's so easy to get bogged down with a certain way of thinking or a certain mindset that someone from another industry can just very easily say, have you thought about it this way? And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't think about that.
That's amazing advice.
Yeah,
actually, that's amazing advice.
And then I think that the last piece of advice I'll throw out there, and then you guys can kick me off here. It's just when let's say, and going back to your example of the person who, is maybe stalled out mid-career, and let's say you get that advice from somebody, right? They say, listen, your problem right now is that you do a terrible job of listening in meetings, and like people feel like you're always steamrolling them, right? And so let's say, Luke, let's say you make that change, and then for 2 months, like you have been that person who is just so good at listening. You're so good at active listening, repeating back, understanding the other person's point of view. And what I've often found, either for myself or for others, as I've sort of coached and managed them through this process of changing, is that perception is always lagging. Like the people will always think of you as the person from 6 months ago, not the person you are today. So you could literally be a different person and have been a different person for a couple of months, but they're still thinking about you in the way that you were. And so it can become really easy to get discouraged and frustrated when you feel like I'm this new person, yet nobody sees it yet. You just have to recognize that sometimes it takes 3 months, 6 months, sometimes even a year of being that new person, of making that change before others around you begin to see that. So the point is, like, don't lose faith, don't lose heart when you feel like you're making those changes and no one recognizes it yet. It always takes longer than what we would like it to take.
That's great advice. It's almost like, I guess just erasing that first impression that people get from you. I guess why that's so important. But then it's like really, an internal transformation for yourself as well.
Yeah.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
That's great advice. Bobby, this time has been wonderful. Bo, did you have any more questions for Bobby?
Bobby, you're obviously someone we could sit here and talk to all day long, and just have super productive conversation, and just be truly inspiring for others. And Luke, I think today hit the mark. We want the Bo and Luke Nation to be inspired and to learn something from each of the guests that we bring on. And we hit that today on multiple points. So Bobby, we really thank you for taking your Saturday morning and hanging out with us and just giving. I mean, this is giving back. You're giving back to everybody listening. And, it's all on the mantra of helping others do better every day.
Yeah, and thanks, guys. Listen, I really like what you're doing with the podcast. I love the mission, and I'm confident you're going to be successful. I was actually listening to the Luke sent me the podcast from last week. I was listening to that one. That was really, really good. I took some nuggets from that. So
with Jared.
Yeah, with Jared. That's right. Yeah, I took some nuggets from that. I really enjoyed that. So you guys are doing great work. I know you're going to be successful.
Awesome. We appreciate that. I'll tell you one quick story, and then we can wrap, I guess. So speaking of Jared, amazing young man. He's 26 years old. He's been, I think he said this is his fifth year in the NFL. He invited my wife and I to his family home in Akron. So we actually went to dinner, to a barbecue. His dad was cooking. Amazing barbecue guy. Johnny, you're awesome. This Thursday night, which was a couple days after we recorded the podcast, and something you said about, Luke, you said you brought up about the car that Bobby drives.
Yeah.
Thanks, Luke. Appreciate that, man.
Let's keep talking about that for a while.
Let's talk about my crappy beater.
Yeah. But I think there's some commonality amongst people that once you get into that mindset and that financial success, or just making things work for you and the assets. So when I was sitting at the dining room table with Jared, and he started talking about that, and in 2014, so 5 years ago, so maybe when he first got out of college or right thereafter, or maybe it was just before, he had bought a Camaro, and he still drives it today, right? And he definitely has the resources to buy whatever he wants.
Absolutely.
But he just has that mindset, which is fantastic. And I think he did the same thing. He brought some inspiration to folks, and it's great that we're finding people that want to participate, in the podcast and just bring it. And you did that, Bobby. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be a loyal listener going forward.
Bobby, you're a fascinating man. I think, Bo, I'll speak for both of us. We're going to have you back at some point on this show, because we just touched on too many things, not only with personal and professional growth, but with finance. And I feel like we could just spend a whole nother block of time on, and Bo and Luke Nation, we will put links up on our website as well. Of course, with information about Bobby, there'll be a nice picture of him. We'll put a link out to EverFi as well, so that, if you're interested in, bringing that to your school system, or utilizing it or just finding out more, you can link out to that. We'll put a link out there to his LinkedIn profile. So if you want to blow Bobby's inbox up and message him directly, you go right ahead.
Or if anybody, a link to my 2004 Honda Accord, 200,000 miles on it. If anybody want to buy that, it's for sale at this point.
we will include a picture of that as well. Does the car have a name? Have you named it?
I never named the car. No, I don't think it ever deserved one. It was just yeah.
Put it on Facebook,
but I mean,
place, and then send us the link, and we'll post it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's exactly what we'll do. So we'll include pictures of the car, of Bobby, of your beautiful little dog Kunu, which we didn't get to talk about, you being the dog father. But we'll put Kunu up there as well. But
yeah.
Guys, this has been amazing. You know what? I don't know about the Bo and Luke Nation. I learned a lot from this conversation today, and great way to start off Saturday. Bo?
These early guests are going to end up being, when our show is like syndicated nationally, because that's where we're headed. We're going to have these like Bo and Luke show contributors, just like you have like CNN contributors and Fox News contributors. They're going to be coming back, and they're going to be our regular people from the field, just bringing it for the Bo and Luke Nation.
Yeah, and I knew Bobby would bring it. He always does. In everything he does, he always brings it.
Thanks for having me on, guys. It's been a pleasure.
That's a wrap.